It's true in operations, but in marketing it's not. You know, when you bring together all these marketing companies, somehow it's not normal that you drive one language, one set of key success metrics. I mean, when you ask local marketers all around the world, so how's your loyalty? You get statistics back from research agencies you've never heard of, and you're comparing apples and oranges, and you just don't have that consistency across the world to say, how are we doing? It's very difficult, and chief marketing officers in boardrooms feel exposed because they are not as flat. I was just talking to a CMO, a CEO of a huge pharma company 2 weeks ago, and she said it took us 6 weeks to find out how much we spend on marketing. We just didn't know. We're still trying to find out how much we're spending on advertising. This is something that's not as flat as the other parts of the business. Now, outside the company, things are very flat. I mean, I would never argue that we're going towards one global consumer, but we work with a lot of global brands, and this is a project with Calvin Klein. And what we see is that the youth segment, for example, is very consistent across the world. When you take youth in Shanghai, for example, they are much more the same in terms of habits and attitudes to youth in Milan, New York, or Paris than they are to their own uncle and auntie living 1.5 hours outside Shanghai. So even though there's no one global consumer, most of our clients are saying that the consumer segments that they're playing towards, that they are converging, and that in fact they can play to them at a global level. Now, marketing organizations themselves, of course, are responding, and they're globalizing all around, and I'll show you some statistics around that. But even marketers, this is a personal hobby of mine, when you look in LinkedIn and type in global marketing, how many people have that in their role description? It's exploding over time. Over the last 3 years, it's fourfold. Now, of course, this is not scientific because LinkedIn has expanded itself as well. So I'm not claiming that this is scientific research, but nevertheless, the number of global marketeers today exceeds 500,000. So when we ask them in our quant, how important in your company are the global brands in your portfolio? Most companies have local brands and global brands. How important are they in driving your future vision? Well, the first thing you see is that a vast majority of the numbers, it's in the low 80s, agree that the global brands are playing a more important part in achieving the future growth. Secondly, when you ask, but who's in charge? Are those global brands? In the old times, you know, you'd have Nestle with a set sort of a portfolio of brands, but the marketing director in Australia could do with each brand as he liked or as she wanted. Now, as you see, the brands are far more centrally controlled. Just over the last 3 years, you still see a tremendous centralization of authority on the brands. And then the big question is, how well is that going? And we ask people, are you good at leveraging your scale? In other words, you're fighting small competitors, you're a big global company. Are you better because you're able to take one thing from one place to another? Are you leveraging your scale? And only 12% of all the people we interviewed said, yes, we're good at it. So suddenly you see that things aren't as rosy as you'd hope. That the centralization is happening, but is not delivering against what the companies are hoping to achieve. And in fact, if you take the litmus test of when you get something right, let's say a campaign really works, let's say a positioning seems to be the right one, are you good at rolling it out globally? Again, just over 10% agree that their company is actually good at rolling out initiatives. So this is what we're talking about here today. On the one hand, global brands are becoming more and more important, and authority is being taken away from local marketers. On the other hand, it's not going well. And that's the gap that people get stuck in. That's the gap that agencies and consultancies are trying to help these clients with. So what is it that keeps them awake at night? The first, and this is the Diageo Chief Marketing Officer, is this sense of, I'm in charge now, but actually, with all the touchpoint explosion that's happening, I don't feel that I have the expertise to guide my people. He actually gives you the example as follows. He says, you know, I've done marketing for 25 years, and it feels like bowling. I see the pins, I have the ball, and I've got a good technique. I've practiced many years. And if I get it right, I know roughly how many pins I'm going to hit. 9, 8, sometimes 10. But I'm confident. Now, with social media and the internet and everything out there, I feel like it's more like a pinball machine. I hit the button and I just pray to God that I hit something along the way that I'm trying to hit, and that it doesn't hit the things I'm trying to avoid. But it's actually something that's very true for marketing leaders that now need to budget. At the same time, this global transparency. People are finding out about what their brand is doing in other places in the world, not from their colleagues, but through the internet, through press articles. The transparency outside is bigger than the transparency inside the company. And competition is coming from nowhere. I was in Asia last week. HTC is a lovely example. Let me ask you, and I can see despite these very bright lights, how many of you in the room knew the brand HTC 5 years ago? Just show me your hand. Less than 5 minutes in a whole theater. If I ask you how many of you know what the brand stands for, I know I'm going to see no hands, because it doesn't stand for anything yet. But remember, the same could be said of Samsung just 10 years ago. And now I'm proud to have a Samsung flat screen. These companies are catching up very quickly and building brands built on superior performance. Because this phone is actually the most advanced phone in the world. It's 4G, it's faster, it has more megapixels. So it's not the product problem, it's that they haven't built the brands yet, but they're coming very, very quickly. And it's making them nervous. And I mean, with them, I mean the marketers. But the big issue that we keep running into in global marketing organizations is who's in charge? Who is allowed to do what? And this is when things get personal, and it really starts to touch people's personal responsibilities and makes them frustrated, gets into fights, because the moment you create a second team for Dove at a regional level or at a global level, some of the attention between the marketers starts to not be about beating Procter & Gamble, but about actually having better ideas than region or global. And that's the tension that's focused on the wrong area. It's internal focus rather than external focus. And this is the kind of stuff that really keeps marketeers that are in charge awake at night. Or worse, disconnected pockets of excellence. So that you see that you're getting something right in one place in the world, but it's not traveling from one place to the other. In fact, it's even more frustrating if you are the marketer, let's say in the Philippines, and you're rolling out Smirnoff vodka, and your market is at a development stage that is very comparable to Argentina, let's say 5 years ago. And somehow, it's very big in Argentina now, it's been very successful, but you can't get your hands on the information, the examples, the films, the lessons learned from Argentina just 5-6 years ago. Disconnected expertise within these bright, sprawling global organizations. And it frustrates the hell out of these marketers. But of course, we didn't do the study to find out what doesn't work. We asked, what does it take to win? And this is what we're going to focus on this afternoon. The first is what we would call the what. This is what Simon is actually going to talk about with examples. And there are 3 characteristics of all global brands that seem to make the difference between a brand that's great in one place and a brand that can travel and truly come to the world. And they are about appealing to a universal truth, something innately humane, something that we all have inside us and doesn't need translation. It's about brands standing for something bigger than just making a lot of money or selling a lot of product. In other words, they are purposeful. And it's about brands thinking about delivering solutions that are experiential, total solution, total experience, rather than product thinking or service thinking in isolation. Simon will cover those. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about the how do you lead a brand in a global marketing environment. And many of these things are the things that you as an agency, or as a creative, or as a marketer in a regional or local world can help the global team achieve. Because it needs to happen for things to travel. And they are connecting the audiences across the world, inspiring key marketers, key stakeholders in fact, creating absolute focus, and then driving that clarity about the roles and responsibilities. And finally, giving people the training, the tools, and the case studies to make it work. That together is what we call global marketing effectiveness. But that's a lot of charts and it's a lot of pictures. Let's bring it alive with real examples. And for that, I'd like to now invite Simon Pitt, who is one of our board members and the former CMO of Unilever.
I hope one day have an independent existence not as former CMO of Unilever, but Simon Clift, who's a real person in his own right, but that moment hasn't come yet. So I was in Unilever for 30 years, so I'm not going to apologise for the fact that many of my examples are from that 30 years experience. This is supposed to show in shorthand that I like football, I live in Brazil, and I'm not a very sophisticated negotiator. Why do I live in Brazil? Why did I retire at 50 from Unilever? Well, because when I was chairman of a Unilever company in Brazil 15 years ago, I adopted a street kid who lived with me and my housekeeper for 15 years in São Paulo, then Lisbon, actually, and then London. And 5 years ago, he went back to Brazil, and a week later, he phoned me and said, "Grandpa, I've got news." "Why are you calling me Grandpa?" "That's the news." He found out he had an 8-year-old son from a teenage indiscretion. As you probably know, life comes cheaply, and it sadly goes cheaply in Brazil. So I now spend most of my time in Brazil because he doesn't have a mummy. Why am I telling you that story? I can't remember, but anyway. I became then a rather surprised but doting grandfather. Now, Marc mentioned that the study of 250 brands revealed the importance for successful global brands of the universal truth, a purposeful positioning, and brands that offer a total experience. Now, one of the kind of great privileges of working for a company like Unilever is that you get to spend time in a favela in the northeast of Brazil, or in an Indian village, or in a mega city whose name you've never previously heard of in China, speaking to ordinary people about their lives. And despite the differences in culture and geography and income, people have an enormous amount in common. I mean, they all basically want to have a longer and healthy life. They want to give their kids a head start in life. They want to foster successful and happy relationships, and they're concerned about health, education, and increasing the planet. So it's not entirely surprising that the best brands can ladder up from these universal truths to something bigger. And there's nothing new about this. Coca-Cola has been built on kind of happiness. The Ford company was built on the concept of freedom. And truths don't come much more universal than the fact that 15-year-old boys are interested in one thing. And I'm going to show you an ad from ancient history. It's 15 years old now, but was built from a very detailed analysis or insights of what a British teenager thinks of as the perfect evening out.
Boom shakalaka good boy. Wine your body, ring your bell, dip and go down in the moon style. Wine and go up, wine and go down. Now you feel like it too, and you feel like it too. I do the boom shakalaka to the dance out cool. I see the boom shakalaka to the grand style. We can steady, we can cha-cha, no steady wild. Ragamuffin style of people, it's the big child. Pan go down and kick you when you're versatile. I do the wine and go up.
David!
What?
I've ironed your shirt for you. Do you have to go out tonight?
The Lynx Effect.
I'm trying to explain to my chairman why we pay Jennifer Aniston millions to appear for 3 seconds in a commercial was one of the harder conversations of my career. But that was developed before we started on this long globalization journey for Unilever. And when we tested it in Italy, it completely failed, because none of those insights were true, none of those specific insights were true for Italian teenagers, who didn't like seeing themselves portrayed as nerds, and secondly, seemed to think that the person ironing the shirts was his sister, since it seems to be normal that in Italy your sister irons your shirts. So I think the conclusion is obvious, that you need to look for as universal as possible an insight, but execute it as locally as necessary. The second characteristic of successful global brands is this purposeful positioning, this idea that the brand improves consumers' lives and is marketed by a company that has the interests of consumers and indeed all stakeholders at heart and is concerned in improving their lives in maybe small but important ways. Now, we're all familiar, I think, with examples. The Body Shop inspired a kind of messianic loyalty amongst its consumers by stating that it wasn't tested on animals. Starbucks Coffee in the States is one of the only fast food companies that pays its employees a living wage. And Dove, I'll talk about in a second. Because after all, I come from a company that was founded on a purposeful positioning. Factories in 19th century Britain were just as horrible as any developing country today. And William Lever saw the opportunity of building a business by selling soap, improving health, reducing disease, but importantly building a business. He also introduced pensions and holidays. He introduced workers' housing. It's what we would call social marketing before the term was invented. But importantly, it's not a charity. And Dove is, I think, still in many ways built on a purposeful positioning. The global brand director that Marc referred to had to find a way of uniting this kind of very diverse group of people who'd been managing the Dove brand the world over. And she built on this tradition of real women speaking to camera, the concept of rewriting the stereotypical view of beauty, based on the very important and significant insight that most women feel insecure about their looks. Now, this is completely misunderstood by men, none of whom seem to feel the same sort of insecurity. You've probably all seen short, fat, balding, ugly men looking at themselves in a mirror in a lift and saying, "I'm gorgeous." I promise you, one of the portfolio of jobs I have is I'm a non-executive director of a modelling agency in São Paulo. It's nice work if you can get it. And one of the learnings is that even the most spectacularly beautiful women feel insecure about their looks. And so this was not only a very appealing concept for consumers, it also served as a fantastic energizer and unifier amongst all the people who worked on the brand around the company. People used to come up to me in Thailand or Argentina and say, "Please don't promote me. I'm working on Dove and I feel I'm doing something to change attitudes. I feel I'm doing something good in the world." So let me summarise the concept through this short film.
Show me a smile then. Don't be unhappy, can't remember when I last saw you laughing. If this world makes you crazy and you
make your eyes break. Your boy's fire with diamonds and gold. To set yourself.
The third headline characteristic of successful global brands is that they offer a total brand experience. And these days, that's not just kind of in every touch point within a market, but increasingly every region in the world and every day of the year. So if you like the cliche, from local 360 to global 365. If you think about it, when I was a marketing director a long time ago, you had to worry about quarterly promotional material, maybe monthly media plans. These days, a marketing director has to worry about kind of daily Facebook updates, hourly Twitter reactions, and when the Champions League matches are on, actual kind of real-time, live interaction with consumers. So it's not entirely surprising that these disciplines of kind of quick to react, fast on your feet, PR type disciplines are increasingly important. Now, you'll be amazed from my body shape to learn that I'm not much of a runner, but the brand Nike, of course, thinks of itself as offering a total brand experience. It offers new routes when you come to a city. It offers all sorts of tools to help you become a better runner, measure your performance, etc. And so Nike think of themselves not as shoe salesmen, but offers a full-service company. But even a humble deodorant can offer a total brand experience. Here's another example from the UK of a mobile application from Lynx. And think about it, this is a category of people that in the UK, teenage boys, who simply don't watch television on anybody else's schedule in a conventional way any longer.
Weapons of mass seduction. How the Lynx effect turns mobile phones into pulling machines. To help this poor generation of bedroom-bound boys get out there talking to real girls, Lynx created the Get In There website, an online cornucopia of tips, tricks and gadgets to help a guy seduce the girl of his dreams. With the Lynx effect, even a mobile phone can become a persuasive seduction tool. To complement the website, the mobile phone application uses sound effects to turn the handset into an icebreaker. With the Fit Girl Finder, the phone can track down an attractive lady. And with the Lynx FX soundboard, you can serenade her, claim that you own that Porsche, check for body piercings, impress her with your sporting prowess, and being Lynx FX, you can freshen up afterwards. If you're feeling especially confident, you can be a little more forward and ask for her hand in marriage. Then, if you're feeling really lucky, like any great mobile application, it can be sent virally. It has downloadable wallpapers and you can access the Get In There website. But for guys in need of inspiration, you can download hidden camera footage of the Lynx guys, characters from our website, trying to get in there with some lovely ladies.
I mean, it's going off the scale. It's mad. Yeah, it's not done this before. That's just way off.
And, after a hard day's seduction, guys can upload videos of themselves using the mobile phone on the Get In There website. And if they're man enough, they can attempt the monthly challenge, where guys win prizes by submitting videos of themselves in action. Get In There from Lynx, the first mobile phone campaign that turns your handset into a pulling tool. A weapon of mass seduction.
I know my foster son spent hours with that application. Can you imagine the value for a group of people who don't really watch television of spending time with your brand, and the brand kind of participating in their lives? So, in very headline and rather rushed form, those I think were examples of the importance of the universal truth, purposeful positioning and total experience. Now, moving on to the second section about the how, back to Marc.
Next slide. So what does it take to actually get that into an organization? What we call the drivers of effective global brands. So this really talks around what's happening behind the scenes as marketers talk to each other and connect audiences between local, regional and global and drive ultimately global marketing effectiveness. Well, the first thing is to say that as we work with clients, and you'll recognize this, we see three types of relationships between the local and either a regional or a global headquarters. The first is very comfortable, at least it seems, which is that local marketers do exactly what the global people tell them. And I would describe this as overly dependent. They don't really think about it, they just do it. But it's a very comfortable but very dangerous relationship because they might be doing the things that don't work. You saw this in Eastern Europe as the wall fell, and now you see it still in some of the Asian companies where the marketers just aren't experienced enough. Where most of our clients, and I think yours, get the friction is what we would call the painfully independent phase. This is like the teenager between the teenager and the parents, where it seems that I'm out as the local marketer to just prove the global team wrong. It doesn't matter what the right answer is, I want to prove you wrong. Now, I have my own projects, I do my secret research to show that your campaign won't work here, and I'm out to make you look not as smart as me. And the countries that do this typically are Japan, The US, the headquarters is in the US, the UK, Germany, France, quite a lot of times. The list of countries that fit this bill is very consistent. And where you're trying to get to is what we would describe as interdependent, where basically, and again, here we see countries that are very consistent across all our clients. It's Canada, Portugal very often, Brazil, the Netherlands, Turkey. These are countries which the global team typically finds to respect because they know their stuff, they know their market, and when they push back, they're listened to, and at the same time, they don't push back for pushing back's sake. So they have a global mindset. So what does it take to get to this interdependent relationship? Well, the first, from a leader's perspective, is what we would call servant leadership. It is the listening to understand, to truly make clear that you know there is no global market, there's just 10 very important markets. And then there's another 50 that are quite important, and then there's a lot of other markets that are slightly less important. But that you understand that there isn't a global place, there's just real global marketplaces. And that you, as the global team or as the regional marketer, are out to help them succeed. And at the same time, it says servancy and leadership. From time to time, somebody needs to say, okay, I've listened, this is where we're going to go. That's the leadership. You need to earn that relationship. So how do you do that? Well, for example, we've helped clients of ours just create top 10 summits where the global team sits down, doesn't present, doesn't sell, but listens and says, okay, tell me, what are your competitive challenges? Tell me what's going on with retail in your environment. Listening summits, very important. Or even more integrated, if you like, in their way of doing work, something we call a pulse check, which really checks, do the local marketers believe that the global team understands what's going on in their market? And it's, you know, you get results like this. This is a brand where, all the way on the left, you see that in 2008, less than 40% believed that the global team understands the market reality. We didn't make these numbers up. These are real. But 2 years later, just by doing this well, over 70% of local markets said, hey, the global team is listening. They understand what we're trying to do. They understand what it takes for us to win. At the same time, it requires something from everybody else. Looking for similarities rather than on this picture, looking for differences. This is an airplane that sometimes we show to rooms of people and we say, what do you think about this? And the instinctual reaction that we all have is to make a list of all the things that are wrong about it. It's just human nature. When you see something that you didn't create, you start looking for what you don't like. The problem is, sometimes they're very good ideas. In this case, it's actually the Virgin Galactica, the ship that's going to make a lot of money and take a lot of people into space. I was listening to the CEO of Virgin Galactica last week, and they have signed an incredible amount of people. They've actually already built their airport, which is somewhere in New Mexico. So the company, everyone else, needs to have this mindset of looking for similarities, trying to find what can we all do the same before we start talking about, but this needs to be different. Now, you can measure that as well. I mean, this, for example, shows that the local people think that they're quite strong on looking for similarities, but when you ask the same question of the global team, they disagree. Very often this is the case in global organizations. And you can actually bring it into people's personal evaluations. This is not working at the moment. It's moving there, it's not moving here. Okay. So, how do you do that? Let me just quickly go back. You can actually put it into people's personal evaluations and actually say, do you take a global mindset? Are you looking for what we can do the same before we move on and discuss what needs to be different? Now, the second thing is what we call inspire. How do you get the whole marketing community inspired around whatever global brand proposition you're driving? And how do you do that? So that you win the people that are stuck in traffic, for example. It's very simple things like newsletters among marketeers to say, hey, you know what? We ran this program here and it works. Try it in your country. It's very simple things like global brand books. So many brands don't take the time to just lock down and say, this works. This is what we stand for. This is our vision. Or global brand team sessions. You saw the film of the painting. Well, AkzoNobel, the company behind Dulux, 60% of their marketing people and salespeople and production people have actually gone into neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods in their countries, and helped communities paint. That's the way to make the brand really personal. And whatever it takes, I mean, in this case, it's a global brand stewardship meeting of a huge marketing community that had never met each other, but we're trying to build one global brand. Now, we'll look at another example when we look at Omo, but basically, it's whatever it takes to get people to, under the shower or in traffic, think about how to grow the brand. The third area is what we call focus. How do you create the same metrics everywhere around the world, so people, when they say this is successful, they understand why, and that actually they're measuring it in the same way. How do you develop one strategy? These are 4 pictures of that first global brand team for Dove that I mentioned all the way at the beginning. 5 people from different parts of the world that were running their businesses independent. And it took them 2 days of hard negotiations to finally come up with one piece of paper. It was the Dove one-pager. It had never happened before. And you wouldn't believe how many global brands can't get everything onto one page so that they can tell all the other marketers in the company, this is what we're trying to achieve. Now tell us how to achieve that in your country. Just getting that strategic priority right is often the most difficult thing. And that means that sometimes you need to be able to drive the cascading from what's our category strategy to what is the global brand strategy within that category, to what is our local marketing strategy that recognizes that in Portugal the following things are going on, and this is how we will grow this brand, given all that. But that those 3 strategies are actually very aligned. Because if they're not, people don't understand which piece they're trying to fill the puzzle. It takes a lot of work. Now, we work with a lot of brands that have 100 or 150 countries that they're operating in. Sometimes it's just 30. You can't have different strategies in all of them. So a lot of companies are doing is they're clustering them into market development stage, brand development stage. This, for example, could be for Smirnoff vodka, for example, where a lot of countries are in the functional area. They don't know what vodka is, and you have to explain how to drink it, how to mix it, who to drink it with, the basic functional qualities of the brand and the product before you can move on to building an emotional preference and link with consumers. Companies now are clustering all their markets into groups that are trying to do roughly the same thing, so that they can then say, oh, well, if we're trying to do that, can we learn from each other? And it's much more relevant to cluster this way than geographically. Because if you do it geographically, you might cluster, I don't know, Argentina with Brazil. And anybody that knows anything about those 2 countries knows that they are very, very different. In fact, it makes much more sense to, for example, cluster Argentina with Italy, because they are in the same development stage of the brand than it is with Brazil. Now, I'm not saying that this is the way, but actually going from 180 clusters to 5 makes work and makes learning from each other a hell of a lot easier. And a lot of companies are now doing that. And then that area of roles and responsibilities. This is the number 1 thing that people told us was frustrating them and actually driving people ill. Because when people get frustrated around who's interfering into their job, it gets very personal. In fact, we found from our quant research, and this was quite interesting, that it wasn't the marketing people with the most responsibility that were most motivated. It was the people with the greatest clarity on this is where your role starts, and this is where it stops. Now, how do you do that? This is a 4 quadrants, and if you want to know more about this, look at our book, please. But basically, agree what role the global team will play, what role the regional team will play, and then make the operating model work around that. There is no perfect answer, but make how we work explicit at the beginning of the project. You wouldn't believe how many people tell us, we briefed the campaign, we developed the first concepts, and suddenly out of nowhere comes somebody from regional HQ that was evaluating advertising, and they weren't involved in the brief. Can you get this guy out of here, please? This is the most frustrating area. And actually, I mean, there's no marketer that naturally says, in the morning, gets out of bed and goes, I'm going to develop an operating model. It's not sexy, but it's the number 1 thing that people told us that they wish they had done at the beginning of the project, rather than halfway through. And it doesn't matter what it looks like. This is a Unilever operating model we helped develop that says, what do the brand development people do? What do the operating companies do? What do the staff functions do? Spell it out at the beginning. That's our big lesson and advice. And the final area, before we go to the case study of dirt is good, is build. How do you give people everywhere, whatever their role is, the training and the case studies, so that you don't get those disconnected pockets of excellence? And this might be about how do we do marketing. Diageo has a huge academy of the Diageo way of marketing, because people come from different companies. It might be, how do we market hair products? Because you're in that category, and there are a given number of competitors, and you know how to beat them. Or it might be about real brand immersion. This is what we stand for as a brand, and this is how we compete with our main players. It doesn't matter what it is, but teaching people and giving them the tools, the case studies, whether it's a marketing framework, or a marketing academy, or even online marketing training modules, many different ways to give a marketer, wherever they sit, with their clients, with their agencies, the tools and the training to succeed. So that they say, you know what, not only my brand stands for the right things, but now I also understand how to lead it within the organization, so that you get to that global marketing effectiveness. Now, we're going to take 5 minutes to bring that alive in a real case study, and it's Dirt is Good. This is Omo, Unilever's biggest brand, and the second brand in the detergents worldwide. And Simon is quickly going to introduce it.
So, in the last couple of minutes, we just want to talk about Omo. Omo is kind of the heart of most Unilever business around the world. Skip in Portugal, Person in the UK. And in fact, when we started on the global journey, we had no idea in how many countries it existed, let alone what formulation it was, what packaging, what positioning, etc. So 10 years ago I paid a trainee to full-time try and find out where we had this brand, what it looked like, what it was made of, etc. After 3 months he came up with this very complicated map, then had a nervous breakdown and left the company. And the reality is that they were of course mostly about our molecule is better than Procter & Gamble's molecule, ours washes whiter than that, than theirs, and consumers, housewives in particular, simply not interested. And then suddenly, again, Brazilian, some very good marketeers in Brazil, came up with this fantastic kind of opposite concept, which is that for children to develop and grow, they need to be free to experience the world, and they inevitably get dirty while they're doing that. So that's why dirt is good. And of course, it immediately opens up to creative possibilities that are much more interesting than our molecule washes whiter than their molecule. Who better to explain the concept than Ronaldinho's mum?
Eu acho que ele aprendeu com o esporte, ter aquele espírito de equipe, de que um sozinho não faz nada, de que precisa ajuda dos outros. E ele gosta, eu digo, a criança tem que fazer aquilo que gosta e tem que se dar um apoio, deixar fazer, deixar experimentar. Eu acho que a criança tem que se sujar, tem que brincar, tem que ser criança, porque senão vai ser um adulto frustrado. É o meu nenê.
Porque se sujar faz bem.
And of course, as I said, it opens up to fantastic creative possibilities. So this is a film from Argentina which shows the potential of the concept.
Perdón, mamá. Perdón, mamá.
No lo sé.
No me di cuenta.
¿Dónde tenía la cabeza?
Estaba distraído salvando vidas humanas. Alimentando a mi hija, su hija, tu nieta, mamá.
Pasó mientras estaba ayudando a otros.
Dejando atrás miedos ilógicos.
Acá me ensucié aprendiendo a tener ideas propias.
Acá aprendiendo a no ser egoísta.
A relacionarme con los demás.
Jugar así me ayudó a darme cuenta que ayudar está bueno. A no abandonar ante una dificultad.
Perdón, mamá. Ensuciándome fortalecí mi autoestima.
Para en un futuro no permitir que nadie me lleve por delante. Vos ya lo sabes. ¿Te perdonás, mamá, por ensuciarme? No fue muy maduro de mi parte. Te prometo que lo voy a volver a hacer.
So basically we had all the ingredients of a fantastic mix that went nowhere apart from Brazil and Turkey, because the assistant brand manager happened to come from Turkey. And then, so we had the what intact, and because we didn't have the how, which Mark's going to very quickly tell you about, we had this wonderful unleveraged brands.
So it was literally in 3 countries, and the head put a new person in place and said, don't change anything about the what, but take it global. And literally, she did all the things that you'd expect. She brought people together for a global conference, made the move video, brought literally the team together to bring a purpose life, and then stepped back and said, we need one strategy, we need one focused strategy, and literally drilled it all the way down to a single vision. Now, we don't have time to go into much detail here, but all we'd like to say is that in our book, The Global Brand CEO, you can see this case study in great detail, and actually another 12 other ones, where global brands say, okay, we recognize that things are different in our key markets, but we have one vision where we're taking the brand. And what that then requires is not the same mix to drive that vision, but actually really good global marketers that let go and say, okay, local agency, local marketer, take your reality and take this vision and tell us how to get there. And that's when you get global marketing effectiveness. One vision, but a local execution to get you there. And with that, hopefully, we've given you a little bit of a behind the scenes of how these marketing companies get themselves into knots and then unknot themselves to drive global marketing effectiveness. Thank you very much for your time and your attention today.